we start with anything, we want to make sure that we cover some of the very, very simple basics. And the one thing I want you to know more than anything else before we start is food safety. And so I want to talk to you today a little bit about food safety. I don't want you to think about this as a comprehensive study on food safety. There's plenty of things out there to learn. But I will show you a few things today that will help keep you and your family safe when you cook for them.
600 million people each year get sick with a foodborne illness, and 420,000 of them die. 3,000 people alone in the United States die each year from food poisoning. So this is very serious. If you're picking up this as a hobby, just be sure to pay attention to some very basic food safety tips. Now, if you plan on cooking for a large group of people, I would take a basic food safety course of some kind. But as a home cook, I can give you a few guidelines to get started. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, and you should do a little research on this on your own. And let me tell you, it can definitely save someone from, at the very least, a very bad evening. Most food safety in the home comes down to limiting the replication of bacteria in food. Yes, I know there's other things that you need to worry about. There's some parasites that can be in food very infrequently, but the way most people get sick from food is through bacteria. So in order to tone down the replication of bacteria, we do this in a variety of ways. But really, it comes down to two major categories: sanitation and temperature. There's bacteria in a lot of things. If that bacteria is in the small quantities or it's killed through cooking or cleaning, it's not going to hurt you. But if the bacteria is allowed to multiply or it gets through our defenses of cooking and cleaning, you're going to get sick. So the protocols we have in the kitchen are there for a reason. So there's several potential contaminants in your kitchen at all times. And you should always presume that these are contaminated. You should never presume that they're not a contaminant. Food derived from animals, and that's meat or unpasteurized dairy, those are automatically, you presume they are contaminated. Plants that haven't been washed, presume they're contaminated. Plants that have been partially cooked that are sitting out of room temperature for a while, presume they're contaminated. Toxic chemicals that are in your kitchen, that's clearly a contaminant. Always presume that's a contaminant. And make sure that you keep those things separate. That's also another really important thing, is keeping those things separate. Keep your dish towels away from your Drano, for instance. You are also a potential contaminant. Your saliva, your mucus, that stuff is a potential contaminant for all of your food. So keeping your hands clean, not eating something with a spoon and stirring it, that's all very important. So like I said, we presume all of those things are potential contaminants. So let's start talking about sanitation first. Most bacteria are washed away. They're sort of knocked off your hands with warm soap and water. They're also knocked off of other surfaces with warm soap and water. It doesn't kill them, it just washes them away. And so you want to have running water, you want to have lots of soap, and you want to wash and rinse these things very, very well. So what should we be sanitizing? You always make sure to sanitize the utensils, the cutting boards, the bowls, the pans. Everything you're using to cook should be clean. And if it came into contact with a potential contaminant, it should be cleaned again. If you sneeze on your cutting board, you should clean it. If you sneeze on your knife, if you lick your knife, you should clean it. If you cut raw meat on a cutting board, you should clean it. Anything that has a potential to be contaminated should be immediately cleaned. You should always wash your hands with soap and water, and you should do it a lot. We are learning that now with the potential of coronavirus, but you should be doing that anyway all the time. You should also wash with soap and water anything that comes into contact with your mouth, your tasting spoon. If you carry around a tasting spoon in your pocket and you dip it into the food, you taste off of it, you need to go wash that thing or get a new spoon. You should not be dipping it into multiple things and tasting it. So we talk about temperature. We need to understand that bacteria thrive in environments that are moist in between 40 degrees Fahrenheit and 140 degrees Fahrenheit. That's called the danger zone. Not that danger zone, this danger zone. Be sure to cook potentially contaminated foods to the proper temperature. The proper temperature will almost always be specified in the recipe, but you can find very simple proper temperatures online for meat and dairy and for other things that you are cooking to make sure that the potential contaminants inside that food, the bacteria inside that food, are killed. You want to store food colder than the danger zone. If it sits out in that danger zone, which is 40 to 140, if it sits out in that danger zone, like on the counter for 2 hours, you should throw it away. After 2 hours, that food is no longer good and it should go into the garbage. Now, that really only accounts for things that can spoil, right? You know what can spoil. You know that you can leave bread out on the counter. You know you can leave cookies out on the counter. You know you can leave things like that on the counter because they're not moist environments and bacteria will not grow in them. But you can't leave out mashed potatoes on the counter for several hours. You can't leave out stuffing on the counter or a chicken breast on the counter for several hours. Those things need to get put away. You should not store potentially contaminated food in a place where it can leak or touch other food that's already prepared or it doesn't need to be cooked. So you don't want to store raw meat on the top shelf of your fridge so it can drip down onto other things in your fridge that are potentially going to be served raw or that are already cooked and are going to be served that way. You've got to make sure that you're storing things that it's not leaking those contaminants all over. Lots of fridges have meat drawers nowadays, so you want to store your meat in there if you can. When you cook something, it has to come all the way up to that temperature. All of it does. You don't just put a thermometer in and touch the edge of the meat and say, okay, well, this came up to 165, so it's all good. The thermometer needs to go into the thickest part of the meat. So if you're doing a chicken, let's say, it needs to come to 165 degrees in the thigh, the thickest part of the thigh, where the thigh and the leg meet. That's the thickest part of the bird. So you also need to remember this. If you stuffed something, that stuffing also has to come up to that temperature. If it does not, it is potentially contaminated and could make you sick. So like I said, this is not an exhaustive list by any means. I encourage you to go out and learn more about this topic, especially, like I say, if you're cooking for large groups of people, you really should know more about this. But these few tips should hopefully keep you, for the most part, safe in the kitchen as a hobbyist cook.